Hey everyone, in front of me I have the same application written as a REST endpoint and a GraphQL endpoint. And the purpose of this is to compare the two. I feel like understanding GraphQL is easiest when you compare it to REST. And I just want to talk about some of the reasons why I like GraphQL. So first of all, let's take a look at the REST version. So if you look at our index, we have a simple app built, and the idea behind REST is that you have entities, so just product, and then you apply different HTTP verbs against that same endpoint to do different things. So for example, if you have a get product, then we're going to retrieve something. If you have post, that usually means you want to create a new product. If you have put, that might mean edit or update, and delete would be delete. And so it's just a way to manage your endpoints. And so if we were to look at our controllers here, so in this case I have an endpoint with an HTTP verb, and I'm applying a controller function to respond to that. So we look at this controller here. Of course, we can do anything inside this controller, such as hit a database. This likely would be the scenario here. And then I'm returning a response to the res.json. Same with this add product. I'm going to likely add it to a database, and then I'm going to return something. So if we look at how to hit that endpoint with Postman, we have localhost 3000 /product. This is the entity, this is the ID, this is the HTTP verb. If I press send, I'm going to get the product. Wonderful. If I want to add a product, I will hit this /product, change the HTTP verb to post, and I need to post some data. I need to give the server some data. So this would be some JSON data here. And if I press send, wonderful. Now, something that's going to is worth noting and works a little bit differently with GraphQL is if I accidentally made a mistake like this and I press send, still goes through in my scenario. So I've made a mistake, and of course that means we need to write some validation. And unfortunately, sometimes validation is forgotten, or we forget to write. There's one value we forgot to validate or something like that. And so it's possible to write REST endpoints and not do validation, and that is not a great thing. But it's possible. In this scenario, that is exactly what's happened. Okay, now let's look at the GraphQL version of all this. So if I go to my GraphQL folder index.js, this is analogous to this. So in our Express REST API app, we're setting up Express, setting up all the endpoints and all the controllers. And here, it's a little bit different. I am setting up what's called a schema and my resolvers. And so this is the first difference with GraphQL. You do not have multiple endpoints. You have one endpoint, and you have one verb only, which is post. And so we are throwing away all of these endpoints for one, and we're throwing away all the different ways to hit those endpoints. So that's strange. How do we accomplish all these different access patterns here? So if we look at our schema here, this is where we define how to get at our data. And so rather than specifying different endpoints and different verbs, we throw all that away, and we instead replace that with a concept called query and mutations. So query is analogous to get, you're getting something. Mutation is analogous to anything that changes on the system. So that would be put, post, and delete. But instead of those being HTTP verbs, we're simply going to specify we're either doing a query or a mutation in our posted data. So we'll see that in a second. But the first thing that's different about GraphQL is that you start with a schema. So if we look at our REST API, we are saying, okay, we need a product /ID. We need an ID for this. And we need a get with product post. We're just going to take whatever. In GraphQL, you have to specify a lot more than that. You have to say, okay, for product, what do I need? What's the input? This is not a query parameter at this point. This is, you could think of it just as a input to like a argument to a function or something like that. And I need to say, what type is it? Is it a string? Is it a Boolean? Is it a number? What is it? So we need to specify what the type of it, and then we need to specify what we're going to return. So we need to be explicit about all this stuff. And so in this case, I'm promising that I'm going to return a product which has an ID of string, name of string, and price of int. With mutation, I'm going to take some sort of input here, and this input is going to be this. So I must have an ID, I must have a name, must have a price. If I don't, we'll see what happens if we don't. But we're specifying this is what I expect to get. And I am going to always return this as a result. So this is the first thing you do with GraphQL. Second of all, you need to attach some sort of function to all of these things. So you could think of product and add product. You could think of those as your endpoints from a REST scenario. And rather than lining up all of our endpoints here as a big long list, we're replacing that with schema definitions. So we'd have all of our queries defined here. So you can imagine this. So like over time, this is going to get very big, right? In a GraphQL app, the same thing will happen, but it'll happen here in our schema. So this will get very big. So this is analogous to like your endpoints. And then for each one of these endpoints or definitions, we're going to attach a resolver. Now, it's really important to note, so let me just close out all this stuff here, that if we look at our controllers and we look at our resolvers, they're quite similar. In this case, our controllers are attached to an endpoint in the REST API example. In the GraphQL example, our resolvers are attached to schema definitions, so to queries and mutations. And so they're exactly the same. And so you could imagine in a product, you could do anything here, such as hit a database, and then we'll return. So we're not doing sort of like rec.json or whatever, res.json. We're just going to return something. And in the mutation here, we're going to do something like hit a database, and then we'll return something. Okay, so great. Now let's take a look at how that differs from a query, like a Postman perspective, actually hitting that endpoint. So with REST, we had to specify the URL and the HTTP verb. We got this. For GraphQL, to do the same thing, we specify one URL and we only use post. This never changes. And instead, we specify the ID and the thing that we're going to be doing in the GraphQL query. So I'm doing query product. This matches with query product. And I'm going to say the ID of 1234, and let's send that, and we get the results. Now, one cool thing about this is that you can specify what you want. So from the front end, we can tell the back end exactly what we want. We don't need to get the whole object like you usually do in a REST scenario. We can specify exactly what we want. So when it comes to 3 values, it's not a big deal, but if you have very, very big objects getting returned back to you, that might be really helpful. So there's lots more flexibility from a front-end perspective. Okay, so let's go to our add product scenario. So from a REST endpoint, what we did is we changed this URL to /product, no ID here, and we changed the HTTP verb to post, and we added some JSON data. From a GraphQL standpoint, notice this is the exact same as our get example, and this HTTP verb is the exact same as our get example. These never change. The thing that does change is our GraphQL query. So rather than doing this, we're doing a mutation and an add product, which aligns with mutation and add product here. And so what we're doing is we're setting the input. So this is, so from a REST standpoint, this is analogous to this thing here. So we're going to give it some data, and then we can specify what we're going to get back. So if I press send, let's correct that. If I press send, I'm going to get this back. If I only want the ID, then we can just do that, and we'll get the ID back, and that's it. Now, here's one of the big differences. With a REST endpoint, if I made a mistake here, it's possible that it could go through. It's on me to do the validation. But because GraphQL is schema first, because you just have no choice but to define the schema up front, if I was to make a mistake like this, it's immediately going to tell me, first of all, you didn't give me a price, and that's necessary because we said so here in our definition. And also, we don't know what price 2 is, so that's a problem. So this is great. A lot of validation is happening already because GraphQL is schema first.